لو سجنوا جسمك يا محارب أو غطوا منك العيون تبقى الحر
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. محمد رسول الله والذين معه أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم. صدق الله العظيم. Respected ulama, brothers, mothers and sisters, it is indeed a great bounty of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala upon us that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala grants us the opportunity and chooses us and enables us to talk about such august personalities like the Khulafa Rashidun. Last week, we had the honor and the privilege on speaking in regards to the life of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anh. And this week, we speak on the life of the great Umar al-Faruq radiyallahu anh, the two companions of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who were not only his companions in life, but they are his companions in death, in the sense that they lay buried next to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they are also to be his companions for eternity in Jannatul Firdaus. They will be resurrected with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they will be entered into Jannah with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they will be the eternal neighbors of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Jannatul Firdaus. May Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala grant us proximity to them in the year after. We were not decreed to have proximity to them, physically speaking, in this world. They were born long before we were decreed to come to this world. But we can have proximity to them in our actions and in our deeds. And hopefully, by virtue of that, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala will grant us proximity to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the Sahaba in the year after. I'm going to get straight into it. The overview of the discussion is that there's the pre-Islamic life of Umar radiallahu anh, which is relevant. It talks to a lot of what eventually transpired after him becoming Muslim. Then there's the period in Makkah when he was a Muslim. There's the period in Medina. There's the period when he was the chief confidant and consultant to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh during the period of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh's short khilafah of 2 years and a bit. And then there's the period of the Khilafah of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh himself, which was just over 10 years. We cannot, in the time that we have for this particular discourse, do justice to all of those phases, or even any one of those phases. So I will be using a similar approach to that of last week, and that is highlighting a few aspects from every phase of the life of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and inshallah, the virtue, the qualities, and the leadership abilities of Umar radiallahu anh would radiate and stand tall from this particular discussion. Now, we start with the very basic, right? His lineage converges with that of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam at a common ancestor, Ka'b ibn Luway. Similar to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, also shares a common ancestor. So they come from different branches of the Quraysh clan. His kunya was Abu Hafs, and he was known as Al-Faruq. Al-Faruq means the criterion, one who differentiates between right and wrong, between truth and falsehood. And this was because when he became Muslim, he openly professed his Islam to create the distinction between truth and falsehood. Umar radiallahu anhu was born 13 years after the year of the elephant, and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know, was born in the year of the elephant. So Umar radiallahu anhu lived for approximately 13 years after Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he also passed away like Abu Bakr and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the age of 63. They say he was a tall person, muscular, solid. He was bald from a very young age. He had different wives, and he also had about 13 children. Half of his life approximately was spent in Jahiliyyah. Now, that is a great consolation for those who are not Muslim, and also for those who are Muslim but who have not been living the lives of true Muslims. That every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. Almost half of the life of this great Umar, who lies resting next to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, was spent in Jahiliyyah. He was one of the very few people who were literate, who had the ability to read and write. His father Khattab treated him very harshly. Umar radiallahu anh had a very harsh upbringing. You know, when he was Khalifa, one day he was recalling his early life. And he was telling himself, Umar, today you are the main man, you are the Amir al-Mu'mineen, but don't forget, one day you were no one in society. Your own father used to ill-treat you and treat you very harshly when it came to you shepherding the livestock. Umar radiallahu anh excelled in wrestling, in riding, in horsemanship from a very young age. He loved to engage in listening to poetry and to share poetry as well. He would go to the fairs that used to take place, you know, the fetes like that of Mijana and Ukaz, just to learn about the history of Arabs and the different battles and the different wars. He was very well versed in that. Umar radiallahu at an early age got involved in trade and he was very profitable in trade. So before he became a Muslim, he was already a very rich man. His grandfather Nufail was a known arbiter. He used to arbitrate between people and between clans when it came to their disputes and their wars. And Umar radiallahu followed suit. He became known. This was before Islam. An arbitrator, an arbiter. You know, the Quraysh would call him to arbitrate disputes, to the point that he also became then an ambassador for the Quraysh. All of this transpired before he became a Muslim. So we must refresh our intention. You know, it is mentioned that the pious say, "Inda dhikri salihin tanzilu rahmah," that when you remember the pious, the mercy of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala descends. This is not a hadith, but it is a saying of the pious, and the principle holds true. It was the great Ali radiallahu anhu said, when the pious are mentioned, then begin with Umar. When the pious are mentioned, then begin with Umar. We, the companions of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, had no doubt that Umar was the voice of wisdom. Umar was the voice of wisdom. Many people who claim to be Muslims, they try and play Umar radiallahu anh against Ali radiallahu anh, to say that Umar radiallahu anh usurped the right of Ali radiallahu anh. Waliyadu billah. He was supposed to become the Khalifa after Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and his right was usurped by Abu Bakr, then Umar, then Uthman radiallahu anhum. But if that was the case, then Ali radiallahu anh would not be making such great statements about the likes of Umar radiallahu anh. Nonetheless, we move on. Umar radiallahu anh becoming a Muslim, it's a well-known story. The few points that I would just mention. Umar radiallahu anh's becoming a Muslim, there was a prelude to it. There was a part that led, you know, there were a few things that transpired which led him eventually to becoming a Muslim. One is he saw a group of women migrating from Mecca. And when he asked them, where are you going? They said, people like you, O Umar, make our lives very difficult in Mecca. So we want to go to a place where we can worship Allah without hindrance, without persecution. And that hit the heart of Umar radiallahu anh, to the point that he actually said some kind words to these women. And they were shocked and they said, hey, what's happening? The stern Umar is actually softening. Then there was the dua of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, where the Nabi of Allah said, "O Allah, strengthen Islam by either one of these two individuals, Amar or Umar." Amar was Abu Jahl's name and Umar was Umar. And there's another narration of Tabarani that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made a specific dua. Allahumma izz al-Islam bi Umar ibn al-Khattab khassatan. Oh Allah, Umar, especially Umar. Abu Jahl will be good, but more so Umar. And I've spoken about this previously, that this is the great quality of a Nabi, that he can look beyond the animosity of a person and see the talent of the person, because Abu Jahl and Umar were the two great enemies of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So you had these women who were leaving, and that softened the heart of Umar. He said, you know, our own people are leaving their birthplace because of our persecution. You had the dua of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The Quraysh had a meeting. They were worried about the growing influence of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So they had a meeting and they said, you know what, we need to end this. And the only way to end it is by taking his life, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And Umar radiallahu anh volunteered and everyone accepted. They said, Umar, you're the best man for the job. The story thereafter is well known, right? En route, he's told about his own sister and brother-in-law have accepted Islam. And when he enters the house, he hears them reading verses of Surah Taha. And I always quote this incident when I talk about Quran, that look at the magic and the power of the Quran, that Umar who set out with the intention of killing the Nabi of Allah, he heard those verses of the Quran without having any intention. He walked in there in a rage, in such a rage that he beat his own sister. But the power of the words of the Quran, it hit his heart in such a way that when it came to the verse, Innani anallahu la ilaha illa ana fa'budni, the verse where Allah says that Musa alayhi salam was told on the Mount of Tur that I am Allah and there is none worthy of worship besides me, so worship me. That is when the heart of Umar changed and he came to Dar Arqam where Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was and the Sahaba were, and Hamza radiallahu anhu had accepted Islam just 3 days before that, was there, and people were apprehensive about opening the door, Umar, because they thought he had come with an evil intention. And Hamza radiallahu anhu said, open the door, whatever it is, we'll deal with him. And when Umar radiallahu anhu came in, he proclaimed the Shahada. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was so ecstatic, he proclaimed the Takbir, And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh says that the day Umar became a Muslim, it was a victory for us, because after that we could perform salah in public, we could make tawaf in public. The day he made hijrah, it was a help for us. And the day he became a khalifa, it was a mercy for us. So Umar radiallahu anh, when he accepted Islam, he said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ya Rasulullah, are we not on haqq? The Allah said yes. He said that we must perform salah in public, we must make tawaf in public. Umar radiallahu anh did not hide his Islam. He was a very courageous person. And courage is a great leadership quality. He went to people, he went to Abu Jahl's house, and Abu Jahl was his maternal uncle, knocked on the door just to tell him that I've accepted Islam. But he wanted the news to spread. So he asked people, how do I get the news to spread? So they said, go to that person and tell him. Whatever you tell him, he tells everyone. So he went and told that person, and the news spread very rapidly. It spread very rapidly. Umar radiallahu anh became a Muslim in the month of Dhul Hijjah, in the 6th year of Hijri. He was the 40th male. He was the 40th male to become Muslim. He was steadfast thereafter in supporting Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the duration of the period in Makkah al-Mukarram. I'm not going to go too much into the details there because we have a lot of ground to cover. When the time came for hijrah, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not make hijrah until Allah explicitly commanded him to go. We spoke about that last week in the discussion on Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. But Umar radiallahu anh, he openly said in the haram that whoever wants his wife to become a widow or his mother to mourn him, then try and stop me, because I am going to make hijrah. And no one had the courage to try and stop Umar radiallahu anh. Such was the stature, such was his awe, and such was his prominence in society. Now there's an interesting story here. Umar radiallahu anh had two good friends, and he wanted to make hijrah with them. And I want to narrate the story to you in brief, because again it talks to his qualities, right, and his leadership. So Umar radiallahu anh told them, listen, I'm going to meet you guys tomorrow at a certain place at a certain time. And if any one of you or both of you are not there at exactly that time, we will understand that something has held them back and we will continue with the journey. So the next day, one of the two friends came on time. The other one was not there. So they proceeded. So here you learn and you see the strategic thinking of Umar radiallahu anh. Anyway, he makes hijrah, right, with his friend. When they come to Medina, Abu Jahl comes after a while with someone and reaches out to the friend of Umar and says to him, listen, your mother has taken an oath that she will not bath and she will not comb her hair until you come back to Makkah and she sees you in the flesh. Umar radiallahu anh warned his friend that this is a trap. But his friend was overcome by emotion that, my mother, she needs to see me. His friend told him, Umar, don't worry, let me go with them. I'll see my mother. There's still some wealth of mine in Makkah that I need to take care of and bring it back, and I'll come. Look at again the strategic thinking of Umar radiallahu anh. Umar radiallahu anh says, listen, I don't trust Abu Jahl. So you take my camel. It's a very fast camel, and you ride at the back. When you see that if they're up to no good, you just do a U-turn and you come back to Medina. And this camel is fast. They won't be able to catch you. So he agrees. But en route, Abu Jahl realized what the strategy was, and he said to this friend of Umar, listen, my animal is too slow. Let me do this. Let me join you on your animal. Let's the two of us ride on your animal. And as soon as he agreed to that, Abu Jahl overpowered him. They kidnapped him and they took him back to Makkah as a prisoner, and they took him out of the fold of Islam. But Umar radiallahu anh never gave up on him. Later on, when verses of the Quran were revealed, that no matter what you have done, Allah is still willing to forgive you, Umar radiallahu anh sent those verses to him. And eventually, actually, when he was going to leave Medina to go to Makkah with Abu Jahl, because of that emotion now that his mother wanted to see him, Umar radiallahu anh told him, I'll give you half of my wealth not to go. I'll give you half of my wealth for you not to go. And he went anyway. But look at the generosity of Umar radiallahu anh. Look at the concern that he had for the iman of his friend, that he was willing to part with half of his wealth. But even after warning him and offering him half of his wealth, his friend didn't listen, and exactly what Umar feared happened. But Umar radiallahu anh didn't give up on him. This is another great quality of a leader. When people disappoint you and they let you down and they don't listen to you, you don't give up on them. Umar radiallahu anh sent him those verses, and eventually he then entered once again into the fold of Islam. In Madinatul Munawwara, Umar radiallahu anh was always in the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The scholars write he had certain qualities from before Islam. And the hadith tells us, الناس معادن كمعادن الذهب والفضة خياركم في الجاهلية خياركم في الإسلام إذا فقهوا. If you have these qualities, then they become better under the banner of Islam. But Umar radiallahu anh's character was refined and his leadership was molded because of his companionship of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There was a deep love that existed between Umar radiallahu anhu and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'll just mention two examples, right? One is one day Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "La yu'minu ahadukum hatta akuna ahabba ilayhi min walidihi wa waladihi wan nas ajma'in." None of you are a true believer until I'm more beloved to them than their parents and their children and all of people. Umar radiallahu anhu was very honest. He said, "Ya Rasulullah, indeed you are more beloved to me than my parents, my children, and all of people except myself. You know, I'm more beloved to myself." So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Then Umar, that is not the sign of a true Muslim." And then Umar radiallahu anhu thought about it for a while and he said, "Ya Rasulullah, in reality, you are more beloved to me than I am to myself." And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that you are a true Muslim. Oh, Umar, I knew it, but it's just that you had to come to that realization for yourself. He participated in all of the battles that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam participated in. He was right there next to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even, for example, on the occasion of Hunain, when many fled helter-skelter at the moment of confusion, Umar radiallahu anhu was there together with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and the household members of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He once sought permission from Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam to perform Umrah. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him, "La tansana ya ukhayya fi du'aikum." That, oh my brother, don't forget me in your dua. Umar radiallahu anhu said, when the Nabi of Allah called me his brother, that was so beloved to me, I would have sacrificed anything just for that honor that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam called me his brother. The last expedition in which Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was himself involved was the expedition of Tabuk. And it was a very difficult expedition because it was hot. They had to march at a difficult time. Resources were scarce. Umar radiallahu anh brought half of his wealth. Half of his wealth. You know, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh brought all of his wealth. But he brought half of his wealth to give to the Muslims. When Hafsa radiallahu anha's husband passed away, Umar radiallahu anh first went to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh and offered her in marriage to him. He kept quiet. Then he went to Uthman radiallahu anh and offered her in marriage to him, and he kept quiet. And Umar radiallahu anh felt offended. And later on, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam proposed for her, and he said that, you know, it was only then that I realized that they kept quiet because they knew that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam had an intention. So we learn from this that Umar radiallahu anh wanted that proximity biologically as well to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. At the time when the Nabi of Allah was angry with Hafsa radiallahu anha over some matter, it was Umar radiallahu anh interceded that, "Ya Rasulullah, please do not divorce her. Do not deprive me of the honor of having my daughter in your marriage." There are many stories with regards Umar radiallahu anh during the Medina period as well, which I'm not going to go into because we don't have the luxury of time. But I'll just mention a few things with regards to the virtue of Umar radiallahu anh before we start talking about, you know, the Khilafah. One is that Abdullah ibn Abbas, now it's important again that we see who the narrator is. Abdullah ibn Abbas is from the Ahlul Bayt, the family of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you can see the Ahlul Bayt paying tribute to Umar radiallahu anh. So there was no friction between Umar radiallahu anh and Ahlul Bayt. He said that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam told him that, "Ya Muhammad, O Muhammad, verily the dwellers of the heavens are rejoicing on the Islam of Umar." When Umar became a Muslim, then even the people in the heavens, I mean the angels in the heavens were rejoicing. When the mushrikeen heard that Umar radiallahu anh had become Muslim, they had bigger numbers, they had bigger resources, they had political and economic control, but they said, now things have become equal. They have Umar. Now things have become equal. Ali radiallahu anh says that he did not know of anyone who made hijrah the way Umar radiallahu anh made hijrah. Like I explained, he proclaimed it in public. There are a number of hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam talks about the virtues of Umar radiallahu anh. For example, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam once said, "Whilst I was sleeping, I saw myself in Jannah, and there was a woman who was making wudu besides the palace. I asked, whose palace is this?" She said, "Umar ibn al-Khattab." And the Nabi of Allah said, "I wanted to go in to look at what it looks like inside, but I remember that Umar is a very possessive person, so I didn't go back." And Umar radiallahu anh started crying and said, "Ya Rasulullah, it would have been an honor for me if you entered my palace." But that talks about the virtue of Umar radiallahu anh. Another narration, it's mentioned that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Whilst I was sleeping, I saw myself drinking milk until it was flowing through my fingernails. And then I passed it on to Umar." So the Sahaba said, "Ya Rasulullah, what is the interpretation?" He said, the milk here refers to knowledge. Then there is a narration where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Whilst I was sleeping, a group of people who were shown to me wearing shirts. Amongst them were those whose shirts reached their chests. and some that went below the chest. And Umar's shirt was dragging on the ground. So the Sahaba said, Ya Rasulullah, what is the interpretation? And the Nabi of Allah said, Islam, meaning that Umar's Islam was that strong. And then the famous hadith, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, Oh Umar, by the being in whose control is my life, shaitan does not meet you traveling on one path, except that he travels on another path. The backstory here was one day there were some women folk who came to engage Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And as soon as Umar radiallahu anh entered, they scattered because he was renowned for his sternness, right? And Umar radiallahu anh said, what's wrong with you? You don't scatter because of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but you scatter because of me. And they said, but the Nabi of Allah is not as stern as you are. And that's when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told him, oh Umar, you are so stern in the positive way that even shaitan flees from you. In one hadith, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, it said, verily Allah has embedded the truth on the tongue and heart of Umar. لو كان بعدي نبيا لكان عمر. If there was to be a Nabi after me, it would be Umar. That every ummah has muhaddathun, those who are directly inspired by Allah. And Umar radiallahu anhu was one of those who was considered to be a muhaddath in the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then there's the narration of Tirmidhi, where Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, every Nabi has two ministers in the heavens and two ministers on the earth, or two advisors in the heavens and two advisors on the earth. My advisors in the heavens are Jibreel and Mikael, and earth Abu Bakr and Umar. There were times where Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would say that follow these two after me, Abu Bakr and Umar. And the narrations are many, right? I just quoted a few. And just to highlight that point, that there was no friction between the Ahlul Bayt and Umar and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhum, and Uthman also for that matter. For example, Ali had a son whom he named Umar. Hassan radiallahu anhu had a son whom they named Umar. If Umar was their enemy and who usurped their right of Khilafah, they would not have done so. Then there was the famous incident where Umar radiallahu anhu proposed for the daughter of Abu Bakr, whose name was Kulthum. And she was the sister of Aisha radiallahu anha, from a different mother probably. But Aisha radiallahu anha brought her up. And they were not keen on her getting married to Umar radiallahu anhu, because Umar radiallahu anhu, after he became Khalifa, lived a very difficult life. He put his family on a very strict budget. Right? That was his own zuhd and his own asceticism. So Kulthum felt to be married to him would be a very difficult life. So she declined his proposal. But Ali radiallahu anh accepted his proposal for his own daughter Kulthum, who was born from Fatima radiallahu anh. So Umar radiallahu anh, he was the father-in-law of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was the grand son-in-law of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We know that Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was the father-in-law of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he was not the son-in-law of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Uthman radiallahu anh was the son-in-law twice, but he was not the father-in-law. Umar radiallahu anh was the father-in-law, and he got to get married to the granddaughter of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He also, Umar radiallahu anh, promoted Abdullah ibn Abbas, who was from the Ahlul Bayt, to his cabinet, even though he was of a very young age. Some of the other Sahaba said, we have children elder than him. And Umar radiallahu anh said, don't look at age, look at his knowledge. And he asked him the tafsir of the verse, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ. Everyone else gave a different tafsir, but Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu's tafsir was the best tafsir. So we see that in terms of the virtues of Umar radiallahu anhu, which was also accepted by the Ahlul Bayt. Then the muwafaqat of Umar. Some say there are up to 15 such incidents where Umar radiallahu anh expressed an opinion and revelation came and confirmed the opinion of Umar. There were many times when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam accepted his opinion. One such example was when he said to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we must make tawaf in public, we must make salah in public. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam accepted that. There was an occasion when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in a garden and he told Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, go give people glad tidings that whoever believes in Allah in the last day, meaning you have proper iman, then Allah will enter into Jannah. And Umar radiallahu anh said, Ya Rasulullah, I think people will become lazy. Rasulullah said, yes, okay, I agree with your opinion. But the muwafaqat where revelation came, where Quranic verses came. So, for example, Umar radiallahu anh suggested to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, Ya Rasulullah, why don't we take the Maqam Ibrahim as a place of performing salah? Why don't we take the Maqam Ibrahim as a place of performing salah? And Allah then revealed the verse, وَاتَّخِذُوا مِن مَقَامِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ مُصَلَّى. Then because different people would come to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam all the time for different work, he was the Nabi. Umar radiallahu anh suggested, why don't you command your wives to wear the hijab? And the verses of the Quran were revealed. At a time when there was an issue between Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the wives, Umar radiallahu anh cautioned them, this is the Nabi of Allah, if you're not careful, Allah can replace you. And verses came. Initially, the verses of wine were not a strict prohibition. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ. They ask you about gambling and wine. قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ. There's a lot of sin in it. وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. But there's some benefit. And Umar radiallahu anh said, Ya Rasulullah, ask Allah to give us a clear-cut directive. And then the verse was revealed, Rijsum min amali shaitan, it's from the handiwork of the devil. When the verse was revealed, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِنْ طِينٍ, but certainly we created man from an extract of clay. Umar radiallahu anh said, Ya Rasulullah, this is an indication for Tabarakallahu Ahsanul Khaliqeen, that blessed is Allah, the best of creators. Allah then revealed exactly those words in Surah Mu'minun. When Ra'isul Munafiqeen, the leader of the Munafiqeen, Abdullah bin Ubay, died, the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, out of compassion, led the Janazah Salah. And Umar said, Ya Rasulullah, that will set a bad precedent if we continue to do this. And Allah then revealed the verse, وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتَ أَبَدًا وَلَا تَقُمْ عَلَىٰ قَبْرِ. So these are just 5 or 6 examples that I've given. There are many other examples that you would find in the books of Ahadith. You know, what happened on the occasion of Badr, where Umar gave a particular opinion. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam went with the opinion of others. And the revelation of the verses of the Quran indicated that Umar's opinion was the better opinion. It doesn't mean that he was more superior to Abu Bakr overall, and obviously it doesn't mean that he was more superior to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam overall, but these were the unique qualities of Umar. We know that Amr bin As, whom he had appointed as governor in Egypt, he told him that, you know, the Egyptians, they sacrifice a virgin girl every year to get the river Nile to flow. And he said, no, those are pagan customs. And he wrote that letter, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, min Umar ila Nil. And the river started to flow. Such was the iman of Umar radiallahu anh. Umar radiallahu anh constantly kept himself in check. He kept himself in check. You know, they would hear him saying to himself, oh, Umar, don't think you're the leader. Remember, Allah can punish you. You know, one in front of Allah. One occasion, he was carrying a water skin on his shoulder, and somebody asked him, Umar, why are you doing this? He said, you know, a little bit of pride came into me because I'm the leader. And I had to bring myself down a notch or two. I had to immediately bring myself down a notch or two. So there's another great quality of leaders. We see the leaders today, they only want praise, and they only proclaiming their own praises all the time. Umar radiallahu anh did not like it. When someone said in his presence that you are better than Abu Bakr, and somebody else said, no, but Abu Bakr was better than him. Umar radiallahu anh said, indeed, this man is speaking the truth. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was better than me. His one night in the cave of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was better than my whole life and the life of my entire progeny. We know that Abu Bakr, Ali radiallahu anh said once, narration of Tirmidhi, should I not inform you of the most superior of this ummah after Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? And when they said, who is it? He said, Abu Bakr and Umar. Ali radiallahu anh had a man who denigrated Abu Bakr and Umar, punished publicly. And then he exiled him. He said, I can't stay with you if you're going to talk bad of Abu Bakr and Umar. So it's important that we know these things so we don't fall into the trap of those who claim to be Muslims, but they try and create a rift between Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman radiallahu anhum, and Ali radiallahu anh and the Ahlul Bayt. And they have a very narrow definition of Ahlul Bayt anyway. Nonetheless, continuing the discussion, right? So, Umar radiallahu anh before Islam, Umar radiallahu anh after Islam in Makkah, Umar radiallahu anh on the occasion of Hijrah, Umar radiallahu anh in Medina. We touched on a few of those aspects together with speaking about the virtues of Umar radiallahu anh, and also the times when revelation came down endorsing and affirming the opinion of Umar radiallahu anh. I spoke last week about what happened when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam passed away, and Umar radiallahu anh's reaction, and how it was Abu Bakr radiallahu anh who was the one who was calm at that particular time. I spoke at length last week about what happened at Taqifa Bani Sa'ida and the whole aspect of Khilafah and Umar radiallahu anh's role in that. He was, like I said, the chief minister of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and he was the one who suggested to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh that many of the Huffaz are dying in battle, and therefore you need to compile the Quran. The Quran was in the hearts of people, and different people had different chapters and different verses written in different places. He wanted it to be compiled, and then it was further compiled and structured, covering the different dialects, etc., in the time of Uthman radiallahu anh. Now, when Abu Bakr radiallahu anh got ill, he consulted the Sahaba. He asked Abdurrahman ibn Auf, what's your opinion of Umar? He said, the best candidate. He asked Uthman radiallahu anh, what's your opinion of Umar? He said, you won't find better. He asked many from the Ansar, what do you think of Umar? And they said, best candidate. Talha radiallahu anh had one concern, that Umar is very harsh. Umar is very harsh. But Abu Bakr radiallahu anh responded and said, Umar thinks I'm too soft. So to compensate for my softness, he displays a little bit more harshness so that there can be a balance, right? Because Umar radiallahu anh was the chief minister, if you like. However, when he becomes Khalifa, you'll see that it will mellow him. Now, on this issue of harshness and sternness, I just read something 2 days ago in the Mulfuzat of one of the Akabir, and he said that people normally talk about Umar radiallahu anh being stern as if it was a negative thing, but it wasn't, right? He was stern because of circumstances. So an intelligent person once asked the question that, what is Umar's relationship like with children? Do children like Umar or they don't like Umar? So the answer was, no, children love Umar. When they see him, they run towards him, they rush towards him. He said that Umar is not naturally a stern person, because children will be disinclined from a person who's naturally stern, but they will be inclined to a person who's naturally soft. Umar was stern when there was a need to be stern. He was harsh when there was a need to be harsh. And the same we see with scholars and with parents. Sometimes the father has to be more stern because the mother has natural softness. So the father has to compensate, otherwise the children will run riot. There'll be chaos. So at times children grow up thinking, but our mother showed us more love. Our father didn't show us enough love. But the father had to show you tough love, because the mother's maternal instincts always overcomes, right? That's how Allah Ta'ala has created mothers. There was a point that I explained at length last week, that in all of these models, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam passed away without mentioning explicitly anybody as a successor, but all indications were in favor of Abu Bakr. There was a consultation at Taqifa Bani Sa'ida, which was then endorsed by the broader Sahaba in Medina. So the broader Sahaba endorsed Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, it was not that he unilaterally chose Umar. He had Umar in mind. He called the leaders from amongst the Sahaba to ask their opinion, and they all expressed a positive opinion. Talha radiallahu anh had a concern, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, a lady's concern. Then he told the Sahaba, he asked them that, will you accept my nomination? And they said, yes, we will accept whoever you nominate. So they gave the power to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. Then Abu Bakr radiallahu anh had a will written, and he asked Uthman radiallahu anh to read the will after he passed on. And in that will, it was mentioned that his view was that Umar should become the Khalifa. And Uthman radiallahu anh, before he opened the will, he asked the people in Medina Munawwara, are you ready to accept what Abu Bakr has bequested? And they said yes. So the people had a say, but in a particular structure, in a particular format. So they all agreed in Medina Munawwara. Of course, you couldn't wait for everyone in those days across the Muslim lands. There was no communication like there is today. When Umar radiallahu anh became Khalifa, one of the statements he made, which I found interesting, when I was reading up yesterday, on one of the books, he said, Allah is testing me with you and you with me. It's an interesting comment, a very interesting comment. And to me, it speaks volumes about what leadership is. Leadership doesn't mean the relationship will be all plain sailing. There are times when people will be frustrated with their leader, and there are many times when the leader will be frustrated with the people that he has to lead. That's the part of leadership. That's why he said it's a test. Allah is testing me with you and you with me. He used to consult broadly, Umar radiallahu anh. He would even consult women when he felt that their view needed to be taken into consideration. The famous story here was Umar radiallahu anh was patrolling at night, and he heard a woman singing poetry, complaining that she's missing her husband, and she's longing for intimacy with her husband, and her husband was gone out in the path of Allah. And Umar radiallahu anh immediately went to his wife Hafsa and said, tell me from a woman's perspective, how long can a woman stay without a man physically, intimately? She said, well, a month is okay, 2 months is the challenge, 3 months is a stretch, but 4 months is the maximum. And then Umar radiallahu anh decreed that no man must be away from his wife for longer than 4 months. Umar radiallahu anh, we already discussed early on, and now I'm getting into the part of his khilafah, right? And we can't go into details in regards any one incident, because he was Khalifa for 10 years. And entire books have been written about his Khilafat and the expansion and the conquest and the victories and all of what Umar radiallahu anh did. And that's why even non-Muslims, when they study the life of Umar, they say the world today needs another Umar, a man of insight, foresight, wisdom, courage, qualities. But I want to highlight a few points, and I would encourage you to read up for yourself, because if I'm going to go into the details of any one incident, to create the context would take half an hour, then to highlight that one particular point. So Umar radiallahu anh was an inspired leader. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh appointed Khalid bin Walid as the head of the army in Sham, right? Because he knew that Khalid would be able to lead an army that had the odds stacked against them. They were going up against a superpower. But Umar was so perceptive when he saw that people were starting to attribute the victory to Khalid and not to Allah, and he saw that becoming a problem going forward. He immediately put Abu Ubaidah Amir al-Jarrah in a leadership position. There are those who try and criticize Umar for this, but it was nothing personal. And Abu Ubaidah was from the Ashara Mubashara. He was from amongst the earliest Sahaba. I spoke earlier on about how he uncovered the talent of youth. Right? Today, people say the youth must also be embraced by leadership. How he brought Abdullah ibn Abbas into his cabinet. He took a lot of assistance for his own son Abdullah. He established such justice, right? That this nasheed that was playing before the session commenced, the poet talks about one of the emissaries, the messengers, one of the ambassadors from the superpowers came to see Umar in Madinatul Munawwara, and he asked people, where's this Amirul Mu'mineen? Where is he? So they said, there's he sleeping under the tree. And they were totally, what we would say in our terminology, gobsmacked. They were totally shocked that how is it that a man who leads over such a vast ummah that he's sleeping under a tree? No bodyguards, no protocols, no formalities. So they approached the tree, and Umar in his sleeping state had such an awe that even if they wanted to do anything to him, they couldn't. And that's when they said, Adalta fa aminta fa nimta. Because you are just, right? Because you are just, peace has prevailed. And because peace has prevailed, you can sleep under the tree with no bodyguards, with no fear for your life. Then the year of the famine. This is where you really see Umar radiallahu anhu's leadership qualities coming to the fore. How he rationed, how he planned, how he strategized. But you see, he did not distinguish himself from the common folk. He took an oath that he would not eat ghee, as we call it, yogurt and milk, until it was available to the common people. He said, how can I be concerned for the people if I do not suffer what they suffer? And that's the problem with the leaders of today. They don't suffer what the people suffer. We understand. You don't expect the prime minister or the president to go and sleep on the streets in order to be able to alleviate the poverty of those who are, bound to the streets. But generally speaking, they live in cloud cuckoo land, as we would say. They live in the Eiffel Towers. They're totally disconnected from the reality of the people on the ground. Umar radiallahu anh imposed upon himself what people had to go through and upon his entire family. That is why Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's daughter did not want to marry him. There was nothing wrong with Umar. She understood the virtue. Aisha radiallahu anha rebuked her and said, are you turning down the proposal of Amirul Mu'mineen? She said, no, it's not that I don't want to marry the Amirul Mu'mineen. I won't manage such a tough life. That's what he put his own family through. He insisted on equality. His son Abdul Rahman was in Egypt, and he made a mistake. He committed an error, and he needed to be punished. Right, the had, the penal code, needed to be applied. So Amr ibn al-As, radiallahu anhu, who was the governor of Egypt, he didn't say, okay, because it's the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen, we won't mete out the punishment. He meted out the punishment, but he didn't do it in public. He did it in private. He didn't want to embarrass the family of Umar radiallahu anhu. Umar radiallahu anhu rebuked him. He called him to Medina, and he rebuked him sternly. And then he had his son punished again in Medina in public. He said, you cannot have this inconsistency, that because it's the son of Umar, therefore he can be punished in public and in private, and everyone else's son must be punished in public. How does that work? If he did wrong, he must be punished like everyone else. If you see the strategic acumen and the political foresight of Umar radiallahu anh. I read this just 2 days ago. And I was totally amazed. He kept most of the prominent and senior Sahaba in Medina Munawwara. He didn't allow them to go out. He was very firm on this. And scholars write that there's political wisdom in this. See, the people in Iraq, the people in Sham, the people in Egypt, Islam spread to Libya also in the time of Umar radiallahu anh. So they were new Muslims. They did not get to see Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They did not get to see Abu Bakr. They didn't get to see Umar also, even though they were living in his era. There wasn't technology like there is today. So any Sahabi who would, especially a senior Sahabi, would go there, that Sahabi would become a personality now, a leader, because those people will say, we got a companion of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in our midst. Umar radiallahu anh wanted all political power to be consolidated in Medina, not for himself, but for the sake of the Ummah. Because if there became too many centers of political power, inadvertently, these Sahaba would not have that ambition, then it would weaken the Ummah. Each city and each region would want now to move in its own direction because they would see, no, we got senior Sahaba here who are our leaders. It would have created political chaos. So that's the political acumen and strategic wisdom that Umar radiallahu anhu had. He insisted. And many of the governors that he chose were not from amongst the senior Sahaba, with the exception here and there. Like Umar bin As accepted Islam right towards the end. Muawiyah radiallahu anhu accepted Islam right towards the end. But they had leadership qualities, so he made them leaders. Muawiyah radiallahu anhu over Sham and Amr bin As over Egypt. Right? We know he allowed freedom of speech, but within limits of what is beneficial. So today, people talk about freedom of speech. We know that Umar radiallahu anh, when he started the khutbah one day, he said that listen and obey. Listen and obey. And one person said, we won't listen and obey. We won't listen and obey. I said, why? Very calmly, why? I said, no, Umar, you're wearing a kurta, right? And this came from the booty. The material came from the booty. And when they distributed it, no one had enough material to make a full garment. So how is it that you got a full garment? It means you took a double share. So Umar didn't say, how dare you question my integrity? Calmly, he said to his son Abdullah, explain. So Abdullah said, well, my father got his share, I got my share, I gave my share to my father. That's why he was able to make a full garment with that material. So Umar then continued with his khutbah, and the man then said, accepted, and we will listen and obey. There's the incident of the woman also, who when Umar wanted to restrict the amount of dowry, and she said, no, Umar, you can't do that. Allah is not restricted it. How can you restrict it? He had a particular purpose in mind. He didn't want women not to have, good marriages or good spouses marry them because the mahar was too expensive. And we see today this become a problem. But she was making a point that you can't impose it. You can encourage it, but you can't impose it because Allah has not imposed it. And Umar immediately accepted what she had said. Now people stretch this. They use this. This happened in the time of Umar. So they use this as a license to show disrespect to ulama and to show disrespect to the imams and to their spiritual leaders. No, these people didn't show disrespect. They were clean-hearted. As soon as Umar explained himself, the man said, understood. Right? The woman just highlighted that particular point, but they never disobeyed him. They never undermined him. And there were times when people spoke and Umar didn't show that much of tolerance because what they said was not constructive. So we have to understand everything in its context. Interestingly, he is the first to be given the title of Amirul Mu'mineen. How? Because when Abu Bakr radiallahu anh became Khalifa, he was known as Khalifatul Rasulillah. The Nabi of Allah was known Khalifatullah. He was the deputy of Allah. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was the deputy of the Rasul of Allah. So Umar radiallahu anh now, if they had to call him Khalifatu Khalifati Rasulillah, that is the deputy of Rasulullah, the title would become too long. So there are 2-3 different things mentioned. Some say that people then said we have to find another title for him. So somebody said, well, we are the mu'mineen and he's the Amir, so Amirul Mu'mineen. Or there's another incident that someone said to either Abu Musa Ash'ari or Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhum that go and give our salam to the Amirul Mu'mineen. And then they conveyed it with exactly those words. And Umar said, where you get this Amirul Mu'mineen from? He said, well, that's what those people are calling you. And from there, then the title caught on. And then Amirul Mu'mineen Uthman and Amirul Mu'mineen Ali came after that. But he was the first to be called Amirul Mu'mineen. Another incident which talks about the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anhu and his qualities as a leader. One day Ali radiallahu anhu saw him running after a camel. And said, Amirul Mu'mineen, what are you doing? He said, this is one of the camels of the public wealth, the zakah camels, which people have given out as zakah. If it ran away, it would be. So Ali said, get some other people to do it. You make it very difficult by such and such as precedent. People will expect this of the Khalifa to run after camels. So he said, Ali, you don't understand. If there's a camel on the bank of the Euphrates that dies out of neglect, I feel I will be held responsible on the day of Qiyamah. Now, where's Medina and where's the Euphrates, especially in that era? Yet Umar considered himself responsible for every single person. Today, leaders have excuses as to why it's not their responsibility. They have excuses as to why it's not their responsibility. But Umar was looking for every excuse as to why it was his responsibility. That's why it's mentioned that towards the end of his life, he said, oh Allah, I can't carry this responsibility any longer. I have too much of fear that I'm going to make mistakes. It's better you take me. And it wasn't long thereafter that Allah Ta'ala took the life of Umar radiallahu anh. He once delivered a khutbah and just his izar, his trousers had 12 patches. And this was at the time when conquest was at its height and wealth was flowing in, but Umar radiallahu anh preferred simplicity. One day he was late for Jumu'ah And he excused himself by telling the people, I'm late because I have only one garment and I had to wait for it to be washed and to be dried. Ali radiallahu anh, like Umar was the primary advisor to Abu Bakr, his primary advisor was Ali radiallahu anh. And an amazing camaraderie and understanding between them. It is mentioned that Umar radiallahu anh, famous incident again, but it talks about his qualities. One day he noticed that there was a man who normally used to attend his gatherings who was not in attendance. Now he was so busy, but he wasn't inattentive. He was attentive. He could see exactly who was there and who wasn't there. And when he queried, people said, this man, he's got a bit of a weakness for intoxicants, for alcohol. Now look at Umar radiallahu anh, look at his wisdom, look at his insight, his foresight. Famously, he wrote to him those verses, Hamim, تنزيل الكتاب من الله العزيز العليم غافر الذنب وقابل التوب شديد العقاب ذي الطول. Allah can forgive you, but Allah can also punish you. And the man read it. He said, look at Umar. He's giving me the message subtly, but profoundly. And he made tawbah. Anyone who sat in the marketplace, Umar radiallahu anh would go and monitor the marketplace. Anyone who sat in the marketplace and didn't know the masail and the rulings of the marketplace, he would beat them with a stick. He would exhort prominent Muslims not to give up business. Even if they became financially independent, he would say, continue with business. Otherwise, Muslims would become dependent on others and we won't be independent. And that is exactly what is the plight of the Ummah today. Why is it that 2 billion Muslims can't come to the rescue of 2 million oppressed Muslims? Because we are dependent on others, politically, economically, and in every other way. We are consumers. We are not producers. That's the problem. And Umar radiallahu anh already had that foresight. He used to do the night patrols. I mean, the famous story of the mother who was telling her daughter to mix water in the milk. And she said, no, Umar has forbidden it. The mother said, Umar is not here. She said, Allah is here. And Umar radiallahu anh got his son married to her, and from her progeny came Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. The mother who was boiling water in the pot with no food just to try and get the children to sleep. And Umar radiallahu anh went and brought food from the Baytul Mal and cooked the food for them himself. He developed now. See, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh explained last week, his khilafah was to stabilize after the demise of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to deal with the apostates, to deal with the false prophets, and to stabilize. And in 2 years, he did that. He laid the foundation. Umar radiallahu anh's responsibility was now to build. So he made Medina Munawwara a center of fatwa, a center of fiqh. He would allow people to have different views to him. He would never overrule them in matters in which there was room for difference of opinion. He would say, look, if I had to make the ruling, I would have ruled this way, but it's okay because there's room for difference of opinion. He developed infrastructure for travelers. So camels that were used just to move from Medina to different parts of the Muslim lands, storages for food, en route, the infrastructure development. He established an internal financial system, how the taxation would work for non-Muslims, how the booty would be distributed. He established a judicial system with paid salaries for the judges. He established a governance structure with governors. He established a calendar, the Hijri calendar, because they didn't have proper dates. And now correspondence was coming to and fro. And he took opinion from the Sahaba, and some said the birth of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but there was dispute over the exact date and the demise of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but then there would be a sad moment that they would be reminded of every year. And Ali radiallahu anh said that it's the hijrah that differentiated haq from batil, and he took the opinion of Ali radiallahu anh and established the hijrah calendar. It was in the khilafat of Umar radiallahu anh that Iraq was conquered fully. Syria was conquered fully, although it started in the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. Egypt was conquered fully, Libya. And like I said, he, towards the end of his life, started to make dua. Oh Allah, this burden of khilafat is wearing down on me. It's wearing down on me. He used to say that, if I can come out from reckoning with no good deeds and no evil deeds, I'll consider myself lucky. He then made a very interesting dua. That, oh Allah, grant me martyrdom in your path, but grant me death in the city of Medina. Now, martyrdom was normally for those who went out in the path of Allah. And people couldn't understand this dua of Umar until, his assassination took place. Mughira bin Shu'bah radiallahu anh had a slave, a non-Muslim slave. And that slave came to complain to Umar radiallahu anh that Mughira is not paying me enough. And Umar radiallahu anh said, but what he is paying you is adequate, be grateful. So this slave decided to take vengeance against Umar radiallahu anh, and he made a special dagger with 2 edges. And he poisoned the edges. And when Umar radiallahu anh came out to lead the Fajr Salah, he hid in the safs and he stabbed him. And Umar radiallahu anh realized that now it was the beginning of the end for him, because they fed him milk and it came out from the wound, and he was bleeding. And eventually he passed away a martyr, because he was killed unjustly, but also in the city of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Look at the justness or the justice of Umar radiallahu anh. He sent his son Abdullah that go and ask Aisha radiallahu anha for permission for me to be buried in the same room as Abu Bakr and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Aisha radiallahu anha, look at her selflessness. She said, I wanted that spot for myself, but I will give preference to Amir al-Mu'mineen. Right? Umar radiallahu anh then was told that she has given permission. He said, okay, maybe she's given permission because she feels, she feels hard to say no to a dying man. After I'm dead, before you take my body in, ask her again. If she says no, take me to Jannatul Baqi. If she says yes, then bury me with Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and with Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. Look, there's much more that we could have covered and there's much more that could have been said, but time has lapsed. What I would encourage is that read on the life of Umar radiallahu anh. There's a 2-volume book written by Shalabi, which is now available in English. Anyone who goes to the Haramain, it's easily accessible, and it could be accessible online and elsewhere. Read specifically about the conquest of Jerusalem and the leadership qualities that Umar radiallahu anh displayed during that particular period. It's a long story with many details. Read about the different events that transpired. There's so much from the life of Umar which is of relevance to us today. So we've got time for a lot of other things, and I would suggest that that you read on the life of Umar radiallahu anh as extensively as you can. And when you read on the life of Umar radiallahu anh, then internalize those qualities and internalize those values. It radiates not only in terms of leadership, but in many other aspects of life. That Umar radiallahu anh is truly what we would call an exemplar. In other words, he is a person that we can set as a golden standard, as a model for us to be able to follow. May Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala grant me and all of us the tawfiq. Once again, jazakumullah to the Al-Misbah team for giving me the opportunity. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala